Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. And welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. I'm your host, Mike Chapman, and we have tonight a special episode, another panel discussion. The topic is how to make male survivors feel safe to disclose. We've talked about disclosure before. I believe we had an entire panel set up on the topic of disclosure and talking about why it takes so long to disclose. And that was also the theme of Male Survivor Awareness Week last fall, because it does take a long time for men to disclose. And on my panel today, we have three of my prior guests. We have Cranford Blackman and Luke Wiersma and Richard Windman. And I will have links to all three of their prior episodes and links to how to contact them as well. And a reminder, we do have a live audience with us. So if you ever want to join us live for future episodes, you can learn more about how to do so at my website, polarlifeconsulting.com/live. And for those people who are in the chat room, we honor anonymity. We will only state your name if you manually type it in with each comment or question. So with that, first opening thoughts. How can we make it safe for a male survivor to disclose what happened to them? I guess, first of all, we need to assume, okay, we think something might be happening, or how do we make it safe so they know we're a safe person to come and talk to, especially for those people who aren't survivors themselves. What do they need to do to be able to be approachable? What do you recommend? We'll start with Cranford.
Thanks for having me on, Mike. You know, I was just up talking at a conference about this specifically, and one of the things I shared with them about how to make it safer for men to feel safer to come forward is, one, it's important for people to know how to respond when a male comes to him and says, hey, this happened to me. For a lot of times, we guys, we grow up, and what do we do when we hear something that's difficult to hear? We make a joke about it. I don't think it's something meant to be mean. I think it's part of how we take that pressure off ourselves. We're hearing something terrible. How do we get rid of that pressure that we're feeling? And we make a joke about it. But if we do that when somebody's decided to open up and share their trauma, it could be a thing that slams the door closed. If they had enough trust in you to actually talk to you about it at all, we need to know how can we respond so that we don't slam that door shut and make them feel uncomfortable, or worse, to have some re-experience of trauma, of being maybe even betrayed by someone they trusted, to not hear them and to be safe with.
Right. Luke, anything to add?
You know, what Cranford said is huge. Trust is really the big thing. How do you trust someone when you're, as a child, it's an adult that's raping you and taking advantage of you like that? And for me, trust was a huge thing. Trust is a huge thing for, I think, at least as far as I've noticed in my advocacy, a lot of survivors. Trust is hard to come by, and knowing who to trust. That in itself is hard, because pedophiles are in a lot of different jobs. So who can you trust, right? It becomes the issue. They say, well, go to a priest or a teacher or so on and so forth. But they're in all those jobs, a policeman, they're in all those jobs. But it is finding trust. It's establishing trust with that child, establishing that you are a safe person to come to. When I first disclosed, I didn't disclose until I was 20 something. And the first time I disclosed, I was drunk. The second time I disclosed, I was drunk. I didn't finally disclose until I was 37 and sober. Like, that was the first time I finally disclosed, and that was with Kevin and Lori
Right.
doing a podcast. Because I trusted them. For a child, it's hard to find that trust.
Right. So, Richard, how can we help make male survivors feel safe to disclose?
There's the old adage, I believe you, and all that stuff. But it's a little bit more than that. It's about making eye contact. It's about maybe having just a general discussion and getting to know who they are. People, I think, intrinsically appreciate when you take notice or are curious or willing to invest yourself in listening to just their life and who they are. I think it takes a little bit of time to, establish some kind of comfort, some kind of trust. I think it's best that when they tell their story for the first time, that they tell it to another survivor. I think that's key. No victim or survivor wants to talk to a psychologist or a therapist or a law enforcement officer or an attorney. They want to talk to somebody just like them.
And that brings up another couple topics. Who did you find to initially disclose to? I guess would be a good way of saying that. And why? For me, I know after the sexual assault by the clergy member, Methodist Church, I had a female friend, good friend. We were in the same campus ministry together, and she was like a big sister, and was finally able to disclose to her. I knew she was safe. I knew she was a safe person to tell because of the relationship we had already built, that I knew I would get sound advice. I knew I would not be teased. And so she was a safe person. And then she encouraged me to disclose to others, including our ministry leader. And that was helpful. When I started to remember the abuse by my father, that was age 30. The first person I disclosed to was my ministry leader. I was in a support group for sexual brokenness issues, somewhat similar to what I'm going through now with husband material. And that ministry leader, I talked to him. I had read something in a book and it just something clicked. And I called him up in tears, and he kind of talked me through everything and helped me get myself back together. But I knew I could trust him because that relationship had been built prior to my having to disclose. And then when the trafficking abuse came out 2019, as I've shared in my story before, it was on the forum Male Survivor. It was with other survivors there talking about it, and they actually helped me to uncover it. And that was helpful. So it was a safe place, anonymous, but I could be very open and honest and get good feedback from other survivors. So I knew it was safe enough. So, Cranford, how have your disclosure experiences been when you've been able to successfully disclose to someone, and why did you feel you could trust that person?
My first disclosure effort went terrible. But I want to back up just a second, Michael. You were saying that you were able to disclose in the group where other survivors were listening. I think that's one of the things that will help us as a community of survivors, whether we've disclosed or not, is for those who feel safe enough to be able to stand up and go, yeah, I'm a survivor. I think it's easier for us to talk to another survivor because we know that they get it. It may not be the same pain, it may not be the same fears, but it's close enough that they'll be able to hear it. And so the first person I went to, of course, I shared with my wife first. But then I called up the VA. I'm a veteran, so I went to the VA to get help. And the counselor they assigned me, they didn't have anybody that worked with childhood sexual abuse, but they said, come on in. We work with PTSD. It'll be very similar. It should be fine. So I was happy to go. And when I went in, I explained to the guy what I remembered and what had happened to me. And He listened. I thought things were going well. And then he questioned the validity of my memories, asking me, well, why do you even think any of that's real? Well, I was pretty angry right off the bat. I didn't need my memories and my experience to be invalidated by him. And so I kind of fired back. I said, well, what makes you think any of your memories are real? And he just kind of laughed that off, which I didn't find really funny. But that was my last appointment with him.
Right.
Then I just searched and searched, and I finally came across a women's shelter. I was asking them if they knew anybody, and they said, come on in, we'll talk to you. And even talking to the counselor then, it was really difficult. And my feeling was the wall that was in front of me was, oh, here you are, another therapist sitting on your high horse listening to what's broken about me. And I just kind of politely said, so why are you in this business? And she shared with me that she was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And all of a sudden, it was like my wall crumbled. It's like, oh, you'll get it. You will understand. And she did. And it was incredible. I worked with her for over a year. And just that I knew that she understood made it okay for me to share.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So, Richard, what has been your experience with disclosing your own abuse? Examples of a good experience of disclosing to someone else, and what happened? How did that go, and why was it good?
So, well, all of it was good in telling my story. I mean, my life afterwards would be different, but it would be better, but it would be different. There's still stigma attached to it. Are you gay? Or how dare you talk about that? We're still parishioners. Don't bring that up. So there's that part of it. But my experiences telling my story yielded, I think, nothing but good things. I can remember the first person I told my story to was my first wife, and she immediately moved out of our marital bedroom and went to the guest bedroom, and we never had any kind of conjugal relations after that. And she made me feel strange and awkward. I walked on eggshells for a very, very long time. I couldn't take it anymore, and I told her I was going to tell my story, and she told me that, no, you're not. You're not going to put that shame on our family. And so I had to replace her with a newer model. And I got to a really dark place, and I was in rehab, and just it wasn't a peer-led support group, but it was led by the therapist in the rehab, and we were in a circle. We were moving clockwise. They get to me, and I just said, fuck it, told my story. And I did. And when I was telling my story, there was a girl across from me. Her name was Fawn Spence. And we locked eyes, and other stories went across the room, and it got to her time to speak. And then she told her story, which was similar to mine, which was childhood sex abuse. She was from Oklahoma. She was an Indian, and somehow she migrated down to Lake Charles, Louisiana. We were in the same rehab. And outside of the sessions, we started to talk, and her name was Fawn Spence. I called her my papoose because she's Indian, right? And she would call me Papa, and we would just talk about our experiences, and it was really, really great. And she was doing really, really good for a while, as was I. Several years later, we kept in touch the entire time. We lost her. She had succumbed to what had happened to her. We made a valiant effort. She called me, and we had survivors from DFW, Houston, and New Orleans. We all converged on her. I was talking to her on the phone. It was extremely painful. And she drank herself to death, and she had a seizure right before we got there. And there was nothing that we could do. And that was the first person I ever talked to and told my story that really believed in me. Later on, I'm starting to boil over, right? I'm in the right age range to where we can't take it anymore, and I had settled with the Jesuits. I don't normally record people, and I get accused of that all the time, but I only record evil people. And so I think I'm a little bit sharper the most tools in a tool chest. And so I went into mediation without an attorney, and I the settlement with the Jesuits, and I recorded everything. The first thing that they make you do is they make you go to a psychologist that they hire to vet you to see if what you're saying is the truth. 3 sessions into it, the priest, actually the head dude in charge of the Jesuit order, he shows up at the counseling session and he lays out photos. He says, "Which one is your abuser?" And I went, "That's it." And then he found me credible. He said so. That's on the audio tape, and they settled with me. And I recorded the mediations and everything.
Right.
I took the settlement agreement, and I took all the audio files, and I just blasted it out to the press, the local press in New Orleans. Man, the media was on me. I mean, from Louisiana, they sent photographers, and they came with film crews and everything, and it was really great. But every reporter wanted to talk to me. It was a huge scandal, and they had documentation. There was one reporter, his name's Ramon Vargas. He was a small town New Orleans crime reporter for the local rag, and he wanted me to tell him my story. And imagine I'm vetting all these journalists to see who's going to treat me right, because everybody told me, don't trust the press. And I asked him, I said, "Why do you want to tell my story?" He said, "Because I went to Jesuit high school when I was a kid. And when I heard the audio recordings, I heard my own 8th grade Latin teacher interrogating you, and my toes curled. And we got to get the best."
So he was there. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was like the first one with a voice when I didn't have a voice that believed me, and it just went wild. It went viral. 70 cases were filed just in the high school where all these victims and survivors came forward. It was very, very powerful. And then when you find out who your friends are.
And I want to circle back on bad disclosure experiences as well, because you mentioned both, Cranford. Luke, any bad disclosure experiences where you felt you could trust someone, but it didn't turn out how you thought?
Yeah, with the therapist. It was a Christian therapist too. I went in and I told him everything, and pretty much he told me it was my fault.
Wow.
And that was the last session I ever had with him. I got up as soon as he said that. I got up and walked out. I wasn't having it, and it took me a little bit to come to that conclusion too. That this isn't my fault. This isn't my shame. This isn't my guilt. This is the perpetrators, the person that abused me. This is their fault. That was the only bad one I've had, other than, I mean, I told my mom the first time I think she just had a hard time dealing with it. She didn't know how to handle it. But I went back a couple weeks later and told her, and she cried.
And did she self-blame? It's like, what did I do? It was my fault. I shouldn't have, because I know that's what my mother would tend to do on these kind of things, which is part of the reason why I wouldn't tell her. She would internalize it and make it all about her.
No, my mom
No.
didn't.
Okay,
No.
that's good. But still got very upset about the disclosure.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it was just she didn't know how to handle it. You know, who wants to
Right.
hear that their child's been sexually abused?
Right, exactly. Exactly.
No parent ever wants to hear that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think my own bad experience. After the trafficking abuse came out, I had been for several weeks been involved with my local Celebrate Recovery group, which is a Christian 12-step group, and was in a small group going through a book study, the step study, and maybe about a dozen of us guys. And I had talked about this black hole that I was really investigating, really wanted to look into it, and it turns out it was the trafficking abuse. But I had talked about it in our small group, that this is something I was really struggling with, trying to uncover what that truth was. And then when it finally did, I was so devastated. It's a big, mind-blowing thing to know, oh my God, this horrible thing happened to me, and I'm just now remembering it decades later, and very much freaking out, wanting help, wanting support. And so I reached out to that small group later, only I did not know his full story. And because he had been arrested for some minor sexual offense, but was put into a sex offender support group thing. And he had this little minor sexual thing that happened that he got arrested for, where everyone else was like pedophiles. And so it was group therapy. So they're constantly sharing their stories about all this. And he has to sit there and take it because it's court mandated that he goes through this. And so when I disclosed to him, and it was over text chat because, yeah, it's like, I need to get this out. I'm hoping to like do a call or whatever. And it's like, he said, well, can I just text it to you? He said, fine. Text it to him. It triggered him so severely. Just to describe what had happened to me, he ended up having a little minor relapse himself because it brought him right back to that support group he was in. And it's like, okay. And I didn't get any response from him. It's like, okay, he's supposed to be there for me. I'm not getting anything. I don't know why. He's not communicating. So what's going on? Did I do something wrong? Why is he not helping me? But he was having his own crisis. So yeah, it was just all of my mess and all of his mess. And yeah, it was horrible because I really needed his support at that time, and he wasn't able to give it. But I didn't know enough about his story to realize, yeah, he probably wouldn't have been the best person. And if I did disclose, it would have to be in person where he's ready to hear it. But I didn't know his backstory. So, yeah, that made it difficult. And with so many negative experiences with disclosure, it makes sense why men especially don't like to disclose. And oftentimes, on average, 20 to 25 years from the time the abuse ends to the time of first disclosure for men, because guys don't talk about this. There's such shame and guilt, and it's like I'll be labeled as gay, plus all the physiological responses we've talked about before on here that causes the person to feel like, okay, they're at least partly at fault because my body responds, but that's a normal response that the body responds to touch, and that's very normal. So
Michael, can I say something real quick?
certainly, Cranford.
I think even in the people that we've talked about, and I'm guessing that this happens a lot in a lot of the survivors I've talked to when a disclosure went poorly, it's not that the person hearing was bad or mean or evil or spiteful. They just didn't know how to handle it. And I mean, even the counselor that I talked to, I was angry with him, but he had no training in how to deal with somebody that was having memories of horrible experiences as a child. And I just see that as the difference in, well, what I call light bearers, which are people who can hear and receive stuff. I mean, he was a person who wanted to be helpful, but couldn't. But a light bearer is somebody who's had some training, or if it's a survivor light bearer, you immediately have credibility. But yeah,
I like how you termed that. Yes, that's someone who's able to sit with the survivor, hold space with them while they disclose. And it's hard to do. You have to be ready to receive that burden. They say a burden shared is a burden halved, but that other half has to go somewhere to the person you're sharing it to. And so that person has to be willing to take that on. And that is huge. But yes, I think, how can a survivor know that you are a safe person? You need to hold space and make it clear, I'm here for you, whatever it is. I'm here. I'm here to support you. I'm not going anywhere. And yeah, that was so key. I got a buddy I went through a lot of this stuff with in my church back in 2019. We had gone through a discipleship thing together, and we just developed a really close friendship. And yeah, a lot of crying. I could cry on his shoulder, and he would just hold me while I just got it out, because there was just so much in me that I had to process and get out when this new stuff came up. So that was wonderful. But again, we had developed that friendship and that trust before I got to a point where I needed to disclose stuff. So being there, proving that you are there, you can't just say, yeah, I'm here for you, but the person doesn't even know you. You kind of have to earn that trust, especially for a survivor because we've learned to not trust people, especially male survivors who had male perps. We learned not to trust men. That's ingrained to us. So to get us to a point where we're able to trust men, it takes a lot. It would take a lot of effort to be able to say, I can trust this person, I can trust this man with all of this stuff. Luke, anything to add?
Yeah, I wanted to circle back to a couple of things that were said. One of the things that Cranford said was about the jokes, and I've noticed this in comedy. That's My Boy with Adam Sandler. They make it like this big thing. He was sexually abused by a woman, and that's okay. And that goes right to stigma. And I think another thing with this is that stigma needs to change some. That this is something you can make a joke out of. Ricky Gervais does it too. Just makes jokes about child molestation. Like it's funny and it's not.
Right. And the whole concept of male rape as well. It's like, oh, prisoners, yeah, you drop the soap in the shower, ha ha ha. And that's been a trope on TV since the 70s. I remember sitcoms talking about dropping the soap, ha ha ha. Yeah, they're male rape jokes. And yeah, they don't take it seriously because men are supposed to be so much. But yeah, when it happens, it is devastating. And finding someone that you can talk to without that happening. Yes, absolutely.
And then, like I said, changing the stigma. There's such a stigma about, well, this happened to you, and women molesting boys, it's this great thing. You should be proud or whatever. And then when it's male raping a little boy, it's right away, you're gay. That stigma alone it's devastating to the survivor.
Right. And abuse doesn't make you gay, and homosexuality and pedophilia are very, very different. And yeah, but oftentimes in society, they get classed together, making it that much harder for male survivors to come forward and disclose to others. Absolutely. So, Richard, did you have any bad experiences of disclosing, and how did that go? Who did you disclose to, and why was it bad?
Like I just told you a story, the first time I told my story was to my first wife. She is severely Catholic, and she'll, rather than value her husband, she would rather protect the church. And so that was a bad experience. Losing friends was a bad experience. Oh, well, not friends, but people I thought were my friends, right? Because when you tell your story, you find out who your true friends really are. There's the stigma, the taboo. Are you gay? Are you gay? Are you a faggot? It just goes on and on. And then the laity of the church says that you're lying. It never happened. Father Larry could never do that to you, right? Right? And so those are the negative experiences. But, throughout the journey, I've overcome and people found me credible. I had the audio files, the agreements. I went to federal court in a case. The federal judge found me credible. And it just goes on and on. And so, good or bad, who's to say? When you tell your story, your life will be better, but it will be different.
What else were you thinking, Cranford?
The opportunity for a survivor to know that there's another survivor in the room. Anytime I've spoken at any conference, at any meeting, every time someone has come up to me afterwards and said, hey, I just wanted to tell you that happened to me too. And that's the way I first started finding enough safety to disclose. Was I heard a guy say it on stage. That was before I had decided to reach out for help, but that's what allowed me to. So yeah, I really think the best thing we can possibly do is for the people that are capable, that are okay to be on a podcast, on a video, on a news show, or to speak in front of a crowd who are survivors, to try to do it, because otherwise most of the boys and men out there, they haven't seen anyone that they can look at and go, oh, wait a minute, it happened to him. He seems okay. Maybe I can be okay. And it gives them a chance to, it might be the first time they've ever said it to anyone. And I'm sure you guys know, even the first time you were able to say it, there was a huge pressure relief that I didn't have to hold that in anymore. So yeah, I think that's probably our best shot is, and not that everybody should go out. Not everybody's ready to. Do not go disclose if you're not ready.
Right.
But for the men who are, I think that's the way we help all of our brethren who are still in the dark, holding their secrets all by themselves.
Right. And that goes with the podcast theme, Power of Story. Let me go to the chat room. Peter says, great discussion, guys. Thank you, Peter. Ken is saying, thank you for your honesty and hearing your stories. Anything else that we haven't covered? Let me put it back to Cranford.
I wish that, and it's one of the things I'm working towards with some of the work I'm doing, that the organizations that are there for survivors and who say that they want to support male survivors get some sort of training. I appreciate their desire to help, but I think it's interesting when you go into some of the places, the majority of the things you see are for women survivors, and that can make a man feel uncomfortable. Where are the images of the male survivors? Where are the positive things about us? And I just think it needs to be an active effort, whether it's an advocacy group, a counseling group, first responders, police officers, whoever, that they have some knowledge of how to speak to us when we do share with them, how to make us feel heard and not like we're about to be judged again. But yeah, I just wish that for all the organizations that are out there. I'm sure that there are organizations that really want to help and have no idea that some of the things they're doing are pushing men away that want to come and get help.
Right. Absolutely. Luke.
I think another thing that hasn't been touched on yet is the laws. The laws need to change, and I know, Richard, you've done some work in Louisiana on the laws, but there's a lot of states that first-time offenders only get probation or like 3 years. How is a child gonna feel safe disclosing if their offender's only gonna get a maximum of 3 years? How do they know they're gonna be safe if that person only gets 3 years and then comes back out to reoffend?
Right.
These people
or to
don't
come after the disclosure. Yeah.
and these people don't stop. And
Right.
personally, I think the laws should change to the effect that first-time offenders get life.
Yeah. And I know prison reform and that kind of thing for these kind of horrific offenses, knowing now there's enough research to show the lifelong scars that the victims have, that it's horrendous. And, if we put him up, it's going to kill his career. It's going to kill his life. Well, he shouldn't have done what he did. So, yeah, I totally agree with that assessment for sure, that the whole system needs to be looked at. But that's another podcast. That's another episode.
We are, as survivors, we have to deal with this for the rest of our lives.
Right. Absolutely. So, any final thoughts? We'll go up to Richard.
My final thoughts is going back to what Luke said, is the state of the mental health, psychological, or psychiatric sciences. We spend more resources, money, studying the offenders to try to rehabilitate them. And I wrote a recent paper about this. The recidivism rate of a pedophile is 100%. They don't spend any time, money, or resources on trying to help the victims and survivors. I've visited a bunch, even psychology departments in universities, and they all claim to be trauma informed and trained, and they're not. I went to battle recently with a lady that was holding a support group that I was in, and she claimed to be trauma trained and informed. She didn't have no idea what she was doing to the group. She was saying the most offensive things, that are well intentioned, but they don't understand how it comes across as offensive to us. And they don't take insurance. They can, but they don't want to deal with the billing, right? And if you don't have insurance, you're kind of screwed. So my final thought is that the mental health and psychological and psychiatric services needs to get off their butt and start paying attention to the victims and survivors and not to our abusers, because the recidivism rate is 100%. So the best place for them is in jail for the rest of their life. And we can argue the capital punishment all day long, but they should be contained. They should never, ever be released into society. That's what I have to say.
Right. Understand. Let me go to Luke and then Cranford. Luke?
My final thought would anyone that's listening that is a survivor, I see you, I hear you, I believe you. And I think that's the biggest thing, is being heard and being seen and being believed for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just holding space for that person and building up enough of a relationship so that they know they can trust you. Absolutely. Cranford.
Yeah, final thoughts for me are, if you are considering disclosing to someone, just be sure that you know who they are. Have a good feel for them. Because, like I say, even if they're trying to help, they could say and do things that end up re-traumatizing you or triggering you, even if they're trying to be helpful. And there's also people out there who are willing to use that as a good reason to make a joke about you. So be wary who it is that you're disclosing to. Be sure to feel them out. Make sure that they're trustworthy, and just keep your eyes out for the kind of people you can. There's a lot of people you can. I just think we're all kind of hidden out there in plain sight. So you just have to keep your eyes open.
Right. And for those who want to stand by survivors, make yourself available. Prove that you're worthy to be disclosed to, I guess, would be the best way. Show that you're a safe person, that you're willing to listen, even to the hard stuff. And that's what we need. And like several of us mentioned, survivors who've been there. If you can find one, excellent. Whether that's podcasts or Male Survivor or our support groups that I have, which you can learn more about at polarlifeconsulting.com, and find that person who can hold space with you while you go through it and disclose. Because when you can tell your story, get it out, it is so helpful, it is so healing to get it out of your head and shared with another person, whether that's in writing, in private, or in some kind of public venue. Get the story out, find that person. And sometimes you might have to knock on a few doors and try and fail a couple times. We've all had experiences where we've had disclosures not go very well, but it didn't mean we all stopped disclosing. We still found better people to disclose to. And sometimes it's hard lessons, but you learn. So encourage you, find your person who you can trust, who you can share this with to help in your healing. And so with that, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Live Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarlifeconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled P-O-L-A-R. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.